prophetic things in Daniel. Tonight it'll be chapters 2 and 7, the times of the Gentiles. Times of the Gentiles. You can see on the chart behind me here the phrase itself, which is the biblical phrase, the times of the Gentiles. Now, we'll go to the verse where it's only seen. It only occurs one time in the Bible, the times of the Gentiles. But there's a lot of material on the times of the Gentiles. Chapters 2 and 7 of Daniel are on the times of the Gentiles, though you don't see the phrase there. Christ actually was the only one that gave that phrase, the times of the Gentiles. We'll look at it in a moment. But let's identify what it means first before we look at it where it appears in the New Testament. This time refers to a period of time when Gentile nations will dominate over Israel. It's called the times of the Gentiles. See, God's plan for his people was, as he created a nation out of the loins of Abraham, because there was no nation of Israel, you know. There were nations right after the flood. Nations began after the flood for the first time. There were peoples that were groupal peoples before the flood, but national entities did not start until after the flood. And that's why in the Noahic covenant, which you'll see in Genesis 9, that covenant is a universal covenant. See, there were covenants made with Israel, but this is made with animals and people, that I will never again destroy the earth by water. That's a universal promise to even the 8-point buck that I'm going to kill this year. See, or it might be a little old scrawny something. I'm going to be hunting over in Giles County, and they say they already have an 8-point buck tied up for me, and they're going to loose it and let it come by at 8:15 in the morning for me. I hope it doesn't come by before I drink my third cup of coffee and eat that cold egg sandwich, you know, that's been in my bag since 5 o'clock that morning. But that tastes good, you know, about 8 o'clock in the morning with a cup of coffee. I don't care how cold the sandwich is, you know. Anything tastes good out on deer stand, even beanie weenies, you know. But we'll be hunting over there. So that Noahic covenant promised to the earth that he'll never again destroy it. It's an unconditional covenant. So nations began after the flood, but there was no nation of Israel. There were other nations, but no nation of Israel. So God created a nation from the loins of Abraham. You all should know the patriarchal story of Genesis. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Those are the 4 patriarchs. And Abraham is the granddad of the whole nation, you see. So the nation was created out of his loins through a supernatural birth of with his wife. And when Isaac was born, when she was past age to bear a child, 90 years of age. And so God created a nation through that family line. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. And his plan for that nation was that they would be a kingdom of priests for all other nations. But they miserably failed, as you all know. So when the southern kingdom went into the Babylonian captivity, which you'll see right here, Babylonian captivity. Now the 10 tribes had originally or earlier gone into the Assyrian captivity in 722 BC. The Sargon II came and up north of Jerusalem, above Jerusalem, and took the 10 tribes of Israel into the Assyrian captivity. And left a very poor remnant of Jews in these areas up north. And he interspersed some of his own people amongst this poor remnant that he left of the Jews, and they intermarried with each other, and that's what we call the Samaritans. Like, Christ must needs go through Samaria. John 4. And he met the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well, you remember. And so the Samaritans were half Jews and half Gentiles, half Assyrian. And so, but when the two tribes went into the Babylonian captivity, that started the times of the Gentiles. See, because God deals with Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And so when that southern kingdom went into captivity, then under the Babylonians, then that started the times of Gentiles. And Israel then, she's been under 4 universal empires, as you can see, and as you have the handout here, which we'll be alluding to and referring to. We put the 4 animals on the back, and because they didn't want 2 handouts tonight. So we'll be referring to that now. So the phrase means the times, plural, the times when Israel will be under the yoke of some Gentile power. And so Christ used this phrase. Let's turn to Luke 21:24, where is the only place you find the phrase, and Christ used it. He used it on the backlog of the prophecy of the 70 AD captivity by the Romans. Luke 21:24 is where we'll find the phrase. 21. Starting at verse 20 is the prophecy of the 70 AD captivity, 70 AD disbursement of Jews by the Romans. So they came in 70 AD, and he prophesied of that long before the Romans came to Jerusalem. You'll note verse 20, when you all shall see Jerusalem. That determines a lot of things, that city. And in verse 24, Israel shall fall by the edge of the sword. And they did. Roman Emperor Titus, Josephus, a Jewish historian who was born in 38 AD and wrote the works of Josephus, which you all can find in city libraries. I have the 4-volume set of him, translation of his works, called The Works of Josephus. He was a Jewish historian, as I said. He wrote in the 90s AD, when John wrote, the Gospel in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and the Apocalypse, Revelation. And Josephus said that blood flowed over into some homes in Jerusalem. Of course, they must have been in low-lying areas, obviously, because the Romans killed so many Jews. Josephus said there were about 40,000 Jews killed in that invasion in the city. Hard telling how many outside. Within the city, 40,000. And so Christ is alluding, 41 years before the Romans came, he prophesied that they would come to Jerusalem. Christ prophesied that because he knew. And so Israel shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. And that was their 3rd disbursement. Israel has been scattered 3 times. The Assyrian captivity, 722 BC, and then 606 BC, when the Babylonians took the 2 tribes into Babylon, over in Saddam Hussein's country. By the way, he's going to get in trouble, isn't he? Saddam Hussein. There are 4 crazy men in the earth. I'm not thinking about any husband now. There are 4 crazy men in the earth. You know who they are? One's down in Cuba. Y'all know him. I'm being facetious, but not too much, though. Who's the crazy man in Cuba? Well, that's the way that JFK, he pronounced it, and he was trained at Harvard, He said Cuba. I know it's supposed to be Cuba. But who's the insane person in Cuba? Fidel. You all know him, don't you? He came out of the mountains with dungarees on. He still got them on. He sent them to Cleaner World, though, that one time. I wish that Arafat, he'd send his towel to the Cleaner World, because that thing stinks even on TV. I've even smelled it one time on TV. And so there's one down south of us that's is crazy. There's one over in Sheepland. What's his name? Over in Sheepland, Libya. Gaddafi. He's crazy as a bat. And then there's one on the Euphrates River, Baghdad, of whom I just spoke. Saddam, he's getting in trouble, isn't he? If he doesn't let those American inspectors get in, I'm telling you the truth. Britain has already spoken up about it. And that Washington's getting a little bit unraveled by that thing too, that they can expect some sort of military encounter. Well, we don't know what will happen, of course. And he's crazy as a bat. And then there's one in Washington. No, not what you all think. The one that came from China. He's crazy too. No. People in Tibet, they have wonderful freedom and peace and tranquility. Yeah. You know, there's such a thing as Lying, you know. And so he's not hearing anything about human rights that's brought up against him. Did you all hear what he told President Clinton? He said, keep those demonstrators or those, I guess he used the word protesters. I think he used the word keep the protesters out of my sight. Could you imagine the arrogance of a leader telling our president to keep the protesters out of my sight? Boy, I tell you the truth, he's crazy too. And then, of course, there's some other men that are crazy, and I won't name them. You know, just talk to some wives, and you'll find out about those. But the times of the Gentiles is a time then when Israel will be under some Gentile domination. And it started with the Babylonians. So Christ used that phrase here. And so they've been scattered 3 times now. The Assyrian captivity, the Babylonian captivity, and the Roman captivity or disbursement. You see, and since the Roman time, they've been in every nation under the sun. Jews, of course, about 12 or 13 million of them today. A lot of those are in America, of course, and of course they're scattered in all high-tech countries. So that's where the phrase is used in Luke 21:24. As far as the phrase itself. Now, we must distinguish this phrase from other comparable or similar phrases. Like in Romans chapter 11 and verse 25, that hardness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Turn over there and let me show you that phrase. That means different than the times of the Gentiles. Romans 11:25 is another phrase that has the word Gentiles in it, but it's not the same as times of the Gentiles. Romans 11 is the olive tree chapter. To sit under an olive tree would be a blessing because you can eat the olives. And so Israel was in a place of blessing. But because of her unbelief, she nationally is not under a place of blessing today. While olive branches are grafted in contrary to nature, that's Gentiles. If you look at verse 20, it's because of unbelief that they were broken off. But be not high-minded, but fear, for if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he will not spare thee. Talking Gentiles. So Gentiles are grafted into a place of working, a program of the Lord today, you see. And the Lord is visiting Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. Of course, he's through the gospel is visiting Jews too. But most people in the body of Christ are Gentiles because there are more Gentiles. As I said, there's just about 12 million Jews, but there's over 5.5 billion people on the earth tonight. Overwhelmingly, most of whom are, of course, Gentiles. He's visiting the Gentiles to take out of them a body, a bride, a church of the living God, which is made up mostly of Gentiles, as we all are tonight. I guess every one of us are Gentiles. I don't see any Jewish extraction or anything among us here tonight. We're all Japhetic peoples. See, peoples came from one of the 3 sons of Noah: Ham, Shem, and Japheth. We're Japhites. dark-skinned people like Egyptians and people from India, Mongolia, the black person, are Hamitic people. That's the darker-skinned people. Egypt is called Mizraim. Mizraim, of course, was a son of Ham. Shem are Arabic peoples and Jewish peoples. Christ is a Semite. He's from Shem. We're Japhites. We're Japhetic because we're white-skinned, northern hemispheric peoples. Our forefathers, at least mine, came from Germany. You know, I'm Anglo-Saxon, and I guess most of you all are Anglo-Saxon, either German or English or Dutch or whatever. You're of the Japhetic tribe, Japhetic lineage, as it were. So the fullness of the Gentiles in verse 25, I would not have you be ignorant, brethren, lest you be wise in your own conceits, that hardness, blindness, or we get our word paralysis from that word paralysis, that paralysis or parosis or blindness in part, not in toto, in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Now, what does that phrase mean? Fullness of the Gentiles. It means this body of Christ of which I've been speaking. When the fullness of the Gentiles be come in, then the Lord is going to reinstate himself back with the economy with Israel. See, God is not dealing with Israel today because they're the tail of the nations. They're not the head. He chose them to be the head of the nations, which they will be in the fifth universal empire, which is Christ's messianic kingdom empire. That'll be the fifth universal power on the earth. There have been just four, and there won't be any more. Worldwide empire. The next one will be the messianic empire, when Christ will be King of kings and Lord of lords. And so that phrase, fullness of the Gentiles, refers to this era of time where the question mark is, which is the church age. And he's visiting Gentiles to get a bride out. And when the fullness of the Gentiles be come in, that's the completion of the church. Then the rapture will occur, which we don't have it delineated on this chart here, but it would be right here, because this is the tribulation period. We'll speak more of this later. Well, really the whole thing, you know. So we're just getting started tonight. So this phrase then refers to the church, completion of the church program, fullness of Gentiles, which is to be distinguished from this phrase here. Because this phrase refers to the times when Israel will be underneath some Gentile yoke. See? And then there's another phrase that should be distinguished from even these two. Turn over to Galatians chapter 4. Here's another phrase. This is a little miscellaneous. I didn't have to bring this in. But unless you would have the tendency to amalgamate these phrases, this is one of the reasons why we're mentioning it. 4:4, Galatians 4:4, when the fullness of the time was come, that refers to right here, when Christ came. We don't have the life of Christ on. Can you all see the cross here? When the fullness of time has come, we don't have this on the chart, and that's the reason you can't. But this is the life of Christ before he died. And that's the fullness of times. In the fullness of time, God sent out his son, born of a woman, born underneath the Mosaic law, that he might redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption. You know, we as Gentiles. So these three phrases are to be distinguished. The fullness of time is when Christ came in the fullness of time. By the way, let's note a good administrative knowledge of the Lord at this point, because he's the best administrator that you'll ever see. I mean, he can administrate things. And so he sent his son in the fullness of time. What if God, and this is hypothetical, but what if God had sent his son during this time of Israel's history? These three concentric circles represent the general overall emphasis on Israel. She started with the patriarchs in Egypt. She became a nation, came out about 3 million strong, out of Egypt. And she got into the land in Numbers and Deuteronomy. And, of course, under Joshua, they crossed the Jordan River. And they set up headquarters at Gilgal and other places, started setting up the tabernacle. And they began to grow in the Crescent Land. Then they received their first king, King Saul, which was the wrong tribe, but they wanted him because he was head and shoulders above all. That's not the shampoo. He was head and shoulders above all the other Jewish men, and they wanted someone tall, so they chose Saul. But he was from Benjamin. The kings were to come from Judah, but they wanted him. But they didn't want a little old sheep herding boy by the name of David, who was from the tribe of Judah, who became Israel's second king, and he was king after God's own heart. But they chose Saul. But under David and Solomon was David's son. Under David and Solomon, Israel reached their highest glory. Their best time was under the Davidic and Solomonic time. And after Solomon's death, the nation began to go down. And of course, Rehoboam, Solomon's son, took the two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and their capital was Jerusalem. And then the 10 tribes, they split after Solomon's death. They went down to Egypt and picked up a calf worshiper by the name of Jeroboam, who introduced calf worship to the 10 tribes. And their two cities that emphasized calf worship was Dan and Bethel. And of course, even at Mount Sinai, Aaron took the golden earrings from the ladies and melted it down and carved a golden calf out of that gold that he'd gotten from the earrings of the ladies. And they were doing that Las Vegas striptease sexual dance around that golden calf when Moses and Joshua came down from the mountain, and God killed thousands of men who took the initiative in that. And men are not off the hook on that thing, You can't blame ladies altogether. It's men that took the initiative, and God killed the men that were involved in that Las Vegas spiritual striptease sexual dance. And so they were dancing around the golden calf. Well, that was introduced in the 10 tribes up north, and they wouldn't even go to Jerusalem. So the nation began to go down, down, down. And the 10 tribes, as I said a while ago, went into the Assyrian captivity in 722. Then 606 BC, the 2 tribes down south with Jerusalem, their capital, they went into the Babylonian captivity. What if God had sent his son during the days of David or Solomon? That would not have been a good administrative plan, would it? Why? That was that Israel was at her apex of her glory. That was the highest peak of their history. They didn't need anything. David had beaten all the enemies. Solomon, his son, reigned in peace. If Christ had come then, that would not have been a good strategic move. When did God send out his son? In the fullness of time, when they were under the Roman yoke, the Roman Empire, when there were 200,000 slaves in Rome alone. 200,000 slaves. And the Roman yoke subjugated people. And no wonder Christ said, "Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavily laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me and learn of me, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Because they were under the Roman yoke. And he came in the fullness of time. So distinguish those 3 phrases. And, of course, we're just interested in this phrase here. which was used then in Luke 21:24. The times of the Gentiles. Let's now turn to Daniel 2. Daniel 2 is the beginning of the times of the Gentiles. Daniel, his book of 12 chapters is easily sectioned off into two sections. The historical section down through chapter 6, and then the visionary section from 7 down through 12. And chapter 2 mentions the historical empire of the Babylonians. If you'll note chapter 1 verse 1, that Nebuchadnezzar came during the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. And he came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And you'll note he took Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into captivity the first time he came. He came 3 times. 2 Kings chapter 24 and 25. 2 Kings 24 and 25 will mention the 3 times that he came. He came the first time under Jehoiakim's reign, as here. Then he came during the days of his son, Jehoiakim, and then he came in the days of Zedekiah. 3 times he came. Daniel, of course, starts the times of the Gentiles the first time Neb came. And he came during the days of Jehoiakim. And that started the times of the Gentiles, because he took Jews into captivity, like I just mentioned, these 4 boys, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream of a big, colossal Rambo of a man. And it was a dream at night time, if you note verse 1. And his sleep break from him. And he commanded all the Jean Dixon people around him. Of course, she's dead now. But she couldn't do anything for Nebuchadnezzar even back then. You all know Jean, don't you? He called for all the Jean Dixon Guild, the magicians and the stargazers, the astrologers, those are the stargazers. The sorcerers, those are the necromancers, or those that make contact with the dead through a familiar demon that can get information about a dead person that the living might not know. And seance people, you know, seance people at a seance table, the leader can have a familiar spirit, and that demon can relay information to that leader, and she can disperse that information to those at the seance table. I've never been to one, but I've read about this. And Nebuchadnezzar had all this around him, and he called for them to try to interpret that dream. They couldn't do it. He told them, I've dreamed a dream, verse 3. And they said, well, so what? That's all you all bet. They said it under their breath. That's all you ever do is dream. But they didn't say that out loud. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king, O king, live forever. But under their breath, they said, wish you'd die. But they had to say it, you know. O king, they all had to say that. O king, live forever. And so then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac. Syriac, what's Syriac? Our KJV, our King James translation, translates it as Syriac because that region was called Syria. Other translations translate it as Aramaic or Syrian. Either one is acceptable. Aramaic, I like Aramaic, that translation of that word. Syriac, of course, the Syrians spoke Aramaic. Aramaic is the cognate form of Hebrew. A cognate form of Hebrew. There's some affinity between Aramaic and Hebrew. Some affinity. Christ was an Aramaic-speaking Jew. Peter, James, and John, all the Galileans were Aramaic because that's the land of the Gentiles. You know, Christ lived up north in the land of the Gentiles. That's where the Romans were encamped. Their armies were up north. They only had a couple garrisons of Roman soldiers at Jerusalem because they didn't want to push the Jews too much. Of course, in 70, they sent their armies down to conquer. Remember, there was a centurion at Christ's cross that said truly this was the Son of God. He was over 100 Roman soldiers at the citadel, at the castle there at Jerusalem. And so they spake to him in Aramaic or Syrian or Syriac because of the area called Syria. And from 2:4 through chapter 7, from 2 down through chapter 7 and 28, originally Daniel wrote that in Aramaic rather than Hebrew. Why? Up through 2, and Daniel wrote up to 2:3, he wrote in Hebrew. But from 2:4 through 7:28, he wrote that portion in Aramaic. Why? Why? Because that was the language of the Gentiles in that land. They didn't speak Hebrew. They spoke Aramaic, as Christ did, because he lived up in the land of the Gentiles, as I said. See, Christ, he didn't speak Hebrew. He spoke Aramaic, which is a kindred form of Hebrew. And he actually used Aramaic on the cross. The fourth saying was in Matthew's account, Matthew 27, part of it is in Aramaic, and part of it was written, he spoke in Aramaic, but part of it is given in Aramaic, and part of it is given in Hebrew. Or, of course, vice versa in that Matthew's saying. Eli, Eli, that's Hebrew. Lama sabachthani, that's Aramaic. In Matthew 27, the fourth saying. Eli, E-L-I, El is God, and I is a possessive pronoun, my. So the word El is God, like Elohim, or Joel, or Nathaniel, or Michael. All those are words that end in Hebrew that end in El. That's the word God. Eli, E-L-I, means my God. I is a possessive pronoun. My God, my God. And then Lama sabachthani is Aramaic. Why me have you forsaken? So in Matthew 27, it's recorded, it's written, Matthew wrote it half in Hebrew and half in Aramaic. In Mark 15, it's all written in Aramaic, the fourth saying. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Eloi is my God in Aramaic. Eli is my God in Hebrew. Eloi, E-L-O-I is Aramaic. So this is the longest Aramaic portion in the Bible. Why is it given in Aramaic? Because it concerns these Gentile empires that didn't speak Hebrew, you see. So starting at 2:4 then through 2:7, he's going to bring in these four worldwide empires, which of course will be the times of the Gentiles when they'll have dominance over Israel. So he had this dream. Gene Dixon Gill could not interpret it for him because he had a twofold prerequisite. He said, you tell me what I dream, and then you tell me the interpretation. No king has ever asked that of their Gill. You tell us what you dream and we'll give you the interpretation. Oh, is that the way you want it? Then you could tell me anything, and I wouldn't know the difference. You tell me what I dream and then give me the interpretation. Well, they said they can't. Well, then I'm going to run bulldozers over your houses, you see. I'll make your houses a dunghill. I'm going to run bulldozers, bobcats over you. And, of course, they were killed. Nebuchadnezzar had an Irish temper, even though he was not from Ireland, but he was a raving maniac. He actually contacted lycanthropy, which is, he thought himself to be a wolf man, Lycos wolf and anthropos man. And so God just sent him out 7 years like an animal. And he ate grass for 7 years. And on his nails grew like claws, bear claws. I'm not talking about the fingernails of some ladies, they stick on sleds on that thing. Have you all ever seen a lady at a cash register, and she got all these sleds on. They're about 1.5 inches long, and so wonder how she could ever do the cash register. And she got a ring on every finger, you know. And you look down, and sure enough, she probably got high heels on too. But they couldn't tell him what he dreamed, and neither could they tell what it meant. But there was a man in the kingdom that could. If you look at the end of chapter 2, you'll note that Daniel heard about, because he was one of the wise men. He evidently was not there when Nebuchadnezzar brought out his edict that he's going to run bulldozers over their homes if they couldn't tell him. But Daniel, of course, when he heard about 16, he went in to the king and said, "King, give me a little time, and I'll make known to you." So verse 17, Daniel went to his house and got a hold of his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were their Babylonian names. We know them by their Babylonians rather than Hebrew names. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they went to prayer. They had a prayer meeting. And by the way, you know, there are three different kinds or types of prayers in Daniel. And one of them here is corporate prayer, coming together over a crisis. And I think we're, as a church people, I think we're getting away from corporate prayer because of some issue. I think we could come together when an issue comes up and go to the God of heaven. This was an edict. This man said, "I'm going to run bulldozers over your homes if you don't tell me what I dreamed." Daniel was one of them. So he went into a corporate prayer meeting with his friends. And out of that prayer meeting, or as a result of that prayer meeting, God revealed to Daniel this dream. So Daniel went into the king's presence and told him what he had dreamed, and then turned right around and gave him the interpretation. Those were the 2 prerequisites that Neb had made of his wise men. And Daniel fulfilled both of them. Look at the dream itself, verse 31. Making a long story short now because of our time. We said we're just going to get started tonight, and that's about all we're doing. "King, you saw a great rainbow." "Yeah, that's what I saw." Because he knew what he had dreamed. He knew what he had dreamed because he could never forget it. He couldn't sleep that night. And he remembered what he dreamed. It was a big, colossal giant, big old rainbow. And Daniel said this great image was very bright. And it stood up in front of you, didn't it? It stood up. Now, of course, you know, here we have it prostrated on the ground, on the chart here, because of the fact we couldn't have it perpendicular, because it'd be, you know, would be proportionately right going up and down. So we have it flat out. But this thing stood up in front of him in the dream itself, you know, this rainbow thing. And it's very bright, as these metals are: gold, silver, brass, and iron. Iron doesn't have much color to it, but it does have color. And it stood up before thee, and the form was terrible. It was bright, big, but yet terrible. Bright and big, but terrible. Sounds like a paradox. Bright and big, yet terrible. And by the way, that is the stratagem. That's the strategy of the devil. He wants to present something, because he is the God of this world. He wants to present something as bright and big, and yet it's terrible too. But he's not given that part. He's given the bright part and the big part. Bright and big, but he's not telling you the other side. It's terrible. That's the strategy of the devil. Look in advertising. How does he advertise a drink? A young couple, he's got tux on, she's got an evening gown on, and they're coming out to a Continental. Big car. Cost over $40,000, even if you Jew the man down, you know. And of course, you go to the used car salesman, you know, down here you have to Jew. Okay. Never pay what's on the sticker. No, yeah. And they come out getting a big old car. Nice couple. How does he advertise Slim. And she's slim. She's advertising slim, and she's slim. How do they advertise macho men? They're on two nice big old horses. Got big old cowboy hats on. And both of them, one of them got mustache, and I think the other one doesn't. And they're smoking Marlboro, you know. And got the last beautiful saddle. And got the strap around the breast of the horse, and just beautiful. You look at it every time you go by, because I like to ride horses anyway. And they advertise the Marlboro, you know. Bright, doesn't give the terrible part of it. See, this image was bright and big, and yet it was terrible. He gave him what he dreamed. And he said in verse 32, said this image's head was of fine gold, his breast and arms of silver, his belly, or actually it's plural, his bowels and thighs of brass, his legs of iron, feet part of iron and part of clay. And Neb, you saw until a stone was cut out without hands, which came and smote the image upon his feet that were part of iron, clay, and brake them to pieces. Then the whole image was broken into smithereens. The iron, going backwards now, the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and all the way back to the head, the gold, was broken together, two pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, and there was found no trace. Place there means trace. There was found no trace of them. And the stone then that hit the image on the feet became the millennial kingdom, became a great mountain. See the stone over here? That is a symbol, cataclysmic symbol for the second coming of Christ. The second coming is the red era going down. This is the tribulation period. We'll just acclimate ourselves in the next minute or two, and then we'll come back to this tomorrow night and handle chapters 2 and 7 then with some detail that might be of real interest to all of us. We're just preparing the way tonight. But Christ will come at the second coming under the figure of a stone made without hands. In other words, it's not man-made or man-manipulated. It's coming from above. You know, kingdoms on this earth originate down here because of greed. And they rebel and go against another nation and try to take their land. Just like Red China took Tibet. You know, went in there and took that area. That's the way kingdoms are made down here, by rebelling and fighting with another nation and so forth and taking over. You know, Christ told Pilate, Pilate said, "Are you a king?" He said, "Yes, I am. But if my kingdom is not of this world, if my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight. But my kingdom is not of this world." So he was a king, because thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is done in heaven. So the judgmental part is coming from heaven. Christ will come from heaven and smack the powers to be at the end of the tribulation period and break their military back. I mean, he will do away with military powers by his second coming. The figure here is the stone hits the 10 toes of this image and destroys the whole Gentile powers. Although, of course, you know, the Babylonians had, and the Greeks and the Babylonians, the Medes and Persians, and the Greeks and the Romans had already fallen. But see, Rome's going to be revived in a 10-nation or 10 toes, 10 horn coalition. We'll be speaking more about that tomorrow night now, which will be the tribulation period and the Western alliance of 10 nations in the West. And we'll note the Antichrist, who will be over these 10 nations. Much of that will be tomorrow night. Invite others to come with you if you will, that who are not here tonight. But you'll note that Daniel said that this stone becomes a great kingdom, or a great mountain. Mountain is, see, stone is a symbol, mountain is a symbol. A stone becoming a mountain. Mountain is a figure here for kingdom. In Psalm 30 and verse 7, David referred to the Davidic kingdom as my mountain. Jeremiah 51 verse 25, Jeremiah spoke of the Babylonians coming as a mountain coming, because the Babylonian kingdom was under the figure of a mountain. So this stone will become a great mountain which will fill the whole earth. That is the fifth kingdom, Christ's kingdom on the earth. It'd be universal, just like these previous empires were universal. The Romans was a universal empire, and the Greeks were, the MPs, not the military police, but the MPs, Medes and Persians. And the Babylonians, they were a universal empire. And Christ's kingdom will be one too. But it's going to come as a result of judgment. And it's not coming from below. A man in his anthropocentric philosophy, anthropocentricism is man-centered, and the philosophy of this world is man-centered. But it's theocentric, God-centered. The kingdom is going to come from above, initiated from heaven. It's not going to come as nations, as empires come on this earth. And it's not going to be set up on anthropocentric principles. It's going to be set up on theocentric principles. See? God-centered principles. In Matthew chapter 6, Christ gave 6 laws of the kingdom by which he'll operate this fifth kingdom, by laws. 6 laws. You all read those 6 sometime in Matthew chapter 6. By which he's going to administrate the kingdom. It's going to be theocentric, God-centered. Boy, won't that be a wonderful time on this earth? When God's principles will dominate over this earth, and man's principles and philosophy will not be here. It will not even be allowed. See, human philosophy, we sit in our schools, we sit in the town council, sit in the national government, state government, human philosophy. But the Christ kingdom is not going to be operated like that. It's going to be theocentric principles, biblical principles. That's why the knowledge of the earth will be covered with the knowledge of the Lord will cover the earth as waters cover the sea. See, that'll be over the whole world. Could you imagine theocentric principles being all over the world? If the kingdom were right now, Red China would have to abide by human rights, because Christ spoke a lot about human rights. See, and so when he inaugurates his kingdom, it's going to be based on that too. There's going to be equity. And Isaiah chapter 11 speaks about that the kingdom age will be a time of righteousness and justice for all. So we'll look at chapters 2 and 7 tomorrow then in a more detailed way, and we're just prepared for it tonight. Father, thank you so much for the privilege now that we have this weekend to look at some of these prophetic things like times of Gentiles, the 70 weeks of Daniel, and the 2 resurrections that Daniel speaks about. And so bless during these themes, we do pray. And bless thy people here in churches that are represented among us here tonight. Give us a good evening. Give us a good Lord's Day Sunday in thy churches. And bless thy word wherever it's preached, that people can be saved. And bless us here at Faith tomorrow night and through Sunday, we do pray. In Jesus' name, amen.